Welcome to edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Lisa Danels, author of the book, The Human Edge Advantage, Mastering the Art of Being All In. Lisa, welcome. So glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I really enjoyed your book. So let's start off with you telling us about how you got to where you are professionally.
Yeah, so where I got there professionally is I always think about how one quick decision can lead to something. And when I was in the university and I was in a biology major, I switched and I thought my dad would have a heart attack. And I ended up going into much more of public policy and administration with a concentration in international business. But sure enough, I had to do an internship. So me always focusing on my intuition, I went through, they gave me a catalog book at University of Buffalo, and sure enough, it was the training department in the University of Buffalo. So I did an internship there and I fell in love with learning and development. So when I got out of university, my first thing was find a good company. So I did that and I went to go work for American Express, which was one of my favorite companies I ever worked for. And then from there, very quickly, I went and did my master's degree in organizational development and human resource management. And I just fell in love with the field of leadership, talent management, and organizational development. And I worked in different industries for about 25 years. And then I went off on my own and created Human Edge to be able to really help people inside organizations think differently. I think one thing that is always unique about how I approach things is I really am a bit of a research nerd. So I look at research with a combination of practicality and really help leaders become more self-aware and really understand themselves so they can have a greater impact, both in the business, but also with people.
So tell us a little bit more about your business before we jump in. And I know you're partnered, I think, with your husband.
That's correct. Yeah. So our business is Human Edge, and we started it and we were very particular. And you can imagine it took a lot of bottles of wine to come up with the name because we wanted two things to happen. One is we really felt, because we were both in the field of HR, that the humanness in HR was disappearing. That, it used to be like, if you remember in the States, no one would ever give anybody notice before Thanksgiving. Right. And now all of a sudden, things are starting to change. Restructurings happen. People weren't being treated with the same level of respect. So we felt we needed to bring that humanness back into the workplace. And the second thing is we really wanted to help companies create an edge, right? And an edge would be better hiring decisions, better talent decisions. So we created a series of products, assessment tools, learning and development, leadership development, to really help people be able to marry these two fields together to have impact for business.
Well, it sounds like an exciting new venture that you two are in. And I guess you'll
It
write a
is.
book about what it's like to work with your husband and how to make that work.
Yeah, that has been an interesting journey. I have to say, my husband is German, so we have a very different way of working. But we ended up learning, and I think this is one of probably the biggest lessons for people, is that you have to really value what other people bring and mean in terms of style, right? He is very structured, very organized. I'm more creative. Right. So if we combine those skills together, then it works. We also share some common things like around strategy and around people. So I think we have to find those balances because we can't always have everyone like ourselves. That doesn't really work.
And before we dive into your book, I'm curious, how are you advising your clients to handle the panic that's going on throughout the white collar world over AI and how it's affecting all levels and types of
Yeah.
jobs?
It's actually a very interesting experience because I have all the way from coaching executives. I work with a lot of C-suite, and they're scared because they don't know how to use AI. They don't know what it's about. So part of it is helping them get more comfortable with using AI. The second piece is helping managers being able to have their people learn how to use AI effectively. And the third one is really making sure people are doing it ethically and that there's critical thinking around it. But I think the most important thing, and I think this is the human edge advantage really speaks to it, it's the counterbalance of AI. If you look at some of the engagement numbers that Gallup just put out, engagement numbers are really crashing in companies. And that means that people want more empathy. They want more caring. They want more connection. And the leaders need to be able to step into that space as AI is exploding.
I find teaching at a university that a couple things. One is that students basically learn from the pandemic that they want to be in class and they want to be taught by
Mhm.
humans,
Yeah.
and that they don't know what questions to ask AI to get the best answers. So they
Yeah.
still need help in terms of learning their
Yes.
areas of expertise. And
Yes.
so that's a powerful thing. And the other thing is they're
Yeah.
finding out that there'll be more thinking involved and less of the mundane tasks that they were assigned before. They're actually
Absolutely.
going to be um, pushed forward faster in terms of doing meaningful work. And I think that's going to be a good thing for everybody
Yeah,
at
I
the end of
agree.
the day.
And one thing, Mark, I try to highlight with my clients is that AI does two things. One is it builds capacity, meaning if I already know how to do something, I can do it faster and easier with AI. But I have
Yep.
to know what I'm doing. So when I get something back from AI, I have to be critical thinking, is this the output I was looking for? The second thing is it builds capability, right? It does new things that we haven't been able to do before. So for example, 5 years ago, if I wanted to create a very cool graphic design, I needed to go to a graphic designer. Now I can use AI prompts to create a picture in AI that I never was able to do. So now I have a newfound skill that I never had before. So I think we need to think of it in those two terms.
So let's get into your book.
Sure.
Um, in chapter one, you mentioned that fear often drives workplace behaviors. And
Yeah.
how can leaders foster an environment that reduces fear and encourages courageous, authentic leadership?
Yeah. So if we're going to try to decrease fear, if you notice the world is getting faster and faster and technology is not helping that. So if leaders want to reduce fear, there's a couple things they need to do. One is they need to slow things down. They need to be more present with people. When you're more present with people, people will start to share what is really challenging them. And when they're moving too fast, they can't do that. They can't see those social cues that come when we're moving slower. That's one. The second thing is the brain doesn't really like change. So, what we need to do is we need to paint the picture for the future and we need to help people. We need to repeat things multiple times so that calms down the brain. So, those two things can very easily take away the fear. The other thing is we have to allow people to express that fear.
Were you going to say more on that topic?
Nope, nope, I think that's,
Okay. Al Mulcahy, who ran Ford Motor Company, transformed Ford into a powerful example of truth telling and leadership. How can leaders adapt similar practices in their own
yeah.
smaller scale organizations?
Yeah. So I think one of the most important thing that leaders need to pay attention to is they need to pay attention to if their people are challenging them. And if their people are not challenging them, one of the things they need to do is they need to realize that they have not created enough trust with their team members in order for them to challenge them. They also need to self-reflect to say, am I really willing to hear this tough stuff that I don't know? One of the most important things that leaders need to do, which will make their lives much, much easier, is they need to learn to ask powerful, empowering, open-ended questions that will uncover some of these data points that that people are not willing to bring to the leader. So those are
How-
the
you-
areas that I think are most important.
You've been in HR and human development for over 25 years.
Yeah.
How has that changed since you entered the field?
Oh God, it's so different. I mean, one of the biggest concepts in my book that's really changed is when I started, leaders were not comfortable giving power, right? They wanted to keep the hierarchy. The world was also easier because the world wasn't as complex. The leader knew the jobs underneath them. But the world we live in today, there's so much coming at people, right? They're processing around 16 movies per day, right? So that leaders can't know everything. So it really requires leaders to be able to use their experts on their team, and they might not know what all those experts do. So that means they have to trust and they have to use their intuition to understand what questions they need to ask in order to drive the business. Very, very different. And also the understanding of what does it mean to be a leader? How do you show up being authentic versus, oh, I'm the boss, so people should just listen to me. People want followers. People want to follow somebody because they're going to create a better life for them than they can on their own.
Is there leaders that we see every day that you feel like really exemplify that?
I think there are leaders. I mean, I have experienced them that are much more authentic. And for example, I work with the CEO, and he's phenomenal at asking questions, right? And being fully present with people. So there are. I mean, are there some still old dinosaurs around? Yes, there are.
I mean, is there anybody that you see that we read about, Jamie Dimon or Elon Musk or Bill Gates, anybody that you see out there that you say, when you see them, you can tell the kind of leader that they are? Or is that just too hard to do without being there on a day-to-day basis?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I can tell you one of the greatest leaders who actually wrote the foreword to my book, David Epstein, who's a pharmaceutical leader. People followed him no matter where he went. I mean, I remember when I started at Novartis and I realized there was no talent strategy. I walked into his office and he had a very open door. And I said to him, David, there's no talent strategy. And he goes, well, that's why I hired you. Right? Complete, really trust, like trust. He's like, I hire the best people and I know that they can deliver. And he always created that dialogue and he always supported people. He really was there. If you needed something and you called him, he would respond to emails within minutes.
In chapter 2, you describe the functions of the mind. How can
Mhm.
leaders practically apply the architect function to build the gap between vision and implementation?
Yeah. So let me speak about the architect because this is one that companies really miss because the architect is what brings vision into reality. So imagine you have the dreamers, you have the architects who do the blueprinting, and then you have the builders who actually build, who make things and operationalize things. Now, what's most important for companies is a lot of the times they don't know where their architects are. They don't know who these people are, so they don't know how to leverage them. So one of the things we do with our clients is we actually have an assessment that actually looks at who are the architects, right? So this is one very important thing is you need to identify these people who have the skills that have one foot in strategy and one foot in operations. Because when you identify them, then they can help you really take those big dreams, those visions, and bring them into reality.
Multitasking is a common workplace habit. How would you advise leaders to shift their teams from multitasking to more focused, productive work?
Yeah. So the one thing I've seen that my clients have done really well is they'll do like no meetings on Friday. So that's one thing that I've seen work very well because what's happening is, and you'll speak about this later about the collaboration and the coordination. And one of the big things is there's just too many meetings, right? We're just in too many meetings, and if we can reduce the amount of meetings, then you'll find the multitasking will reduce. The other thing is leaders need to role model it. They need to role model what does it mean to be present with someone. Are they in meetings and they're doing something else? Or are they showing people what it means to give their full attention? The third thing I would say that leaders need to do is they need to prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. Every organization I work with, everybody's struggling with this. So they have to really learn ruthless prioritization so they really focus in on the things that are going to move the needle in the business and not some of the small stuff.
I mean, isn't that Warren Buffett says the most valuable thing you have is your time, and the one thing that you have to master is the word no.
Yes, absolutely. And people don't do that because they don't realize when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
Yeah, I don't think any of us think that, and everybody wants to be as accommodating as possible.
Yes.
Uh, and so they forget about, hey, we're not going to get anything done here if I say yes
Yeah.
to things that are not strategic to the business.
Exactly. And we have to keep coming back to that because a lot of the times, what leaders need to do is they need to keep coming back. People have to hear things 7 or 8 times. So we need to keep coming back to here are the priorities and this is what we're doing.
You note that emotions have long been undervalued in the workplace. How can leaders integrate emotional agility into their organizational culture without it being seen as too soft? And is that mostly kind of a Western thing that you're suggesting here? Because in the East, where I'm at in
Yeah.
Asia, I think we're still years away from that.
Yeah. Well, you mean in terms of that principle that
Yeah,
emotion should be in the workplace. I think it's
yeah.
something that is really evolving. I mean, if you look at Susan David's work, if you look at Brene Brown's work, they are making it more commonplace. And I think if you look at what I find really interesting, if you've looked at leadership development over time, that in order for people to move up, they have to have this EQ. So I think it's there. It just hasn't been talked about. Right. And I would even say it's probably if you really have people who are super politically savvy, and not only do they get emotions, but they actually are able to hold two people's needs at the same time, their own and the other person. I think that's where you start to master some of this EQ and emotional agility piece. Because it's also about how do you self-regulate? How do you understand that?
Yeah, I hear, I just did a seminar on this for a major retailer in Asia. That and just being an intelligent thinking leader who is embracing other people's ideas and acting on them, not just focused on their own ideas.
Yeah, it's
Um,
huge.
yeah. Vulnerability and authenticity are key to connection. What practical steps can leaders take to model vulnerability in a way that resonates with their teams? And also, as you write in the book, be authentic because
Yeah.
some leaders read books like yours and try to check the box as opposed to
Yeah.
being authentic.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go to a story. So I was just working with someone I was coaching today, and they were sharing with me how they're self-regulating themselves. So they're not being authentic because they're starting to say, "How will the person judge me?" So if the person's going to judge me, then they're going into their head and they're actually not being fully present, right? So we were talking about, well, how do you become fully present, and how do you really think about how do you think about not being you don't need to think about how that person views you. You need to be independent of how somebody views you. That's one. The second thing I would say that's super important is vulnerability means as a leader, you need to share where you're frustrated, you need to share your challenges, and you also need to share your mistakes because our people can learn from where we have made mistakes. So important. And a lot of leaders, older leaders, they were taught that vulnerability is a weakness, not a strength. So we have to have a mindset shift that vulnerability is actually one of our greatest strengths because it makes us human.
Do you see a difference in leadership style from entrepreneurs compared to people who rise up through the ranks in large corporations?
The difference I see, I would say entrepreneurs are more in line with what I would call more private equity because they have to move fast. They have to rely on people. So I would say people who rise through the ranks, what's different about them is that they may not move as fast in terms of their decision making. Entrepreneurs tend to use a lot more intuition in the way they operate versus people who grow up in a corporate world where data and facts are emphasized more.
In chapter 4, you talk about gut. You emphasize the importance of intuition and leadership. Can you share? And you just talked about how entrepreneurs do
Yeah.
this. Can you share a concrete example where following your gut led to a breakthrough decision?
Yeah, I'm actually going to give one where when I was working with David Epstein in a meeting, what he did. So we were in a talent discussion, right? And all of a sudden, we were sitting and having and talking about talent and the business, and all of a sudden he jumped up out of his chair. He went to a whiteboard, right? And he had this instinct because he was very passionate about cancer. And he said that cell and gene therapy would be the next breakthrough, right? So his intuition knew that this was the right thing to do. So we went up to the board, he started drawing the organizational chart, and then he convinced the CEO of the company to invest 100 million into cell and gene therapy and create this new business unit. Well, sure enough, as soon as he put the money in the bucket. All these other small biotechs and pharma companies started to invest in cell and gene therapy, which have led to huge breakthrough therapies for people who have cancer. So this was massive, and this was all intuition with him.
Um, how can leaders help their teams strengthen their intuitive abilities to navigate complex challenges, especially I think when they're afraid that even though they have this gut feeling based on their experience, they're
Yeah.
afraid to take the risk that it could harm their career.
You mean the person or the leader? The
The
person
person, the person who the leader would be listening to, they're
would be
maybe
listening to.
afraid. Yeah.
Yeah.
How can the
So,
leader encourage this risk taking?
okay, so there are two separate things. So there's one which is risk taking, which is one thing I find that's super helpful is that leaders need to help people understand the risk equation, right? So the risk equation is opportunity over risk mitigation. So when leaders can ask questions like, what are the opportunities, right? They go to the top of the risk equation. They can help other people become more risk takers. It is an innate trait. So it is one, and it's highly correlated, by the way, to pattern recognition and intelligence. So that's also an important thing. So we want to make sure we're encouraging people to take risk that have that mental ability. Second thing, if we're trying to encourage people to use their intuition more, we need to ask questions like when they're coming from the head stuff, we need to ask questions like, so what do you think? What does your gut say? Right? I find certain cultures are more adept at using gut. Like when I lived in the Netherlands for 2.5 years, the Dutch would say, I feel this, and they would put their hands on their gut. So I think we need to encourage asking and listening and asking people, like if someone in the room has a funny feeling about it, we need to go and dig a little bit more. And that encourages everybody who's even in the group to start to use this type of skill more.
Is there a difference between men and women in that area?
Um, I would have to look in the research. I haven't seen that there's a difference in terms of do women use it more? We think women use it more because we say, oh, women intuition, but I don't think scientifically that that's true.
Okay.
That has
I,
not
I
been
was
my
just,
experience. Yeah.
yeah. Question from the
Can I just
audience.
add
And
some, can I go back to something you just asked though?
yeah, yeah.
When I wrote my book, I think the thing that was most intriguing to me, because I have a whole chapter about the gut, what was most intriguing for me is that the leaders who were most successful were the ones that actually used their gut, that they didn't
I
just use their head, they didn't just
yeah.
use their emotions and heart, they used their gut. And it was primary in helping them make big decisions. Like even if you look at Hilton had to make what really made him as an empire. He had to put a bid on a property, right? And they said, you have to put a bid in. So he used his intuition and he ended up winning the bid. So that's what I saw when I did my research, that the intuition was the game changer.
One of Malcolm Gladwell's books focuses on that. And he also says that most all the research shows that you should go with your gut instinct on
Yes,
things. Um,
absolutely.
A question from the audience. In an era dominated by rapid technological innovation and automation, how can entrepreneurs and tech companies cultivate the human edge to foster purposeful, driven leadership, resilience, and sustainable performances? Is it difficult to encourage a shift from purely performance or profit metrics to long-term values and growth?
Yeah, so if you look at the some of the research in this, they've actually seen, I forgot the name of the book right now, but they've actually shown that purpose actually has higher return on investment. It's Firms of Endearment is the name of the book. And they looked at multiple companies and they found that companies that did not have purpose and meaning did not perform as well. So it's in our benefit to get people to care about why we're doing what we're doing. So it's not just about performance. And by the way, people are going to be listening to what you're saying as a leader, right? They're listening to every word that you're saying. So what you say is where they're going to go because they want to perform. So this is an important thing that as leaders, we're setting the role model. So when you ask about purpose, if you want to involve people in this, right? One of the key things of doing this is making sure the team creates the team purpose together or the company purpose together if you have a smaller company, right? This is one of the most critical things that the team is part of this experience, this co-creation process, because then they feel like it's part of them and then they want to show up and be much more engaged.
How can leaders help their teams strengthen their intuitive abilities to navigate these complex challenges?
Yeah. So one way of doing that is using different techniques that will drive innovation. So what we tend to see in meetings is you see the same people speaking, the people who tend to be more introverted. So we want to create what we call igniting questions, right? These questions activate the right side of the brain. We have different people use different post-it notes, and then we reverse, like we think about the worst case scenario, and then we turn it around so we get new innovative ideas. So there's some techniques that you can use that will show that. One of the things I talk in the book is I talk about we need to start using improv, right? How do we use the ideas of improv to build off each other's ideas and to make sure that we're bringing, not just bringing, where each one of us is bringing a brick and not bringing the whole cathedral. So those are some of the ways that leaders can do that.
In chapter 5, What's Personal Power and Why Do We Give It Away? You
Yeah.
introduced the concept of power within. So you need to
Yes.
explain that. How can leaders help their employees recognize and cultivate their own personal power?
Yeah. So personal power is a very important thing because what it's saying is it completely changes the dynamic. We've been taught through society that power is external and we try to get it. But that's not true. That's a falsity. Our true power comes from our belief of shaping our own life and personal agency. And that personal agency tied to our ability to master our mind, which most of us don't do. Most of us, our mind is going wild and we're not able to focus. And then the other one is emotional mastery. So those three key pillars together make up our ability to be personal, to have personal power. We have a tendency to give it away when we're trying to please people, when we believe we can't influence a certain area. So if leaders are trying to help their people build their personal power, one is first they need to recognize it in themselves. When do they have power? When do they give it away? And then they need to start coaching their people to help them understand how they can shape their own future. So, what can you do to shape this, right? How can you see this? What gets in your way? So, anytime a leader can be really adept at coaching, they can unlock this personal power piece for people.
In a world where hierarchical power over structures persist, what strategies can leaders use to encourage collaboration and shared power instead?
Yeah. So in these hierarchical arenas, one thing they can do is they can push down decision making. They can be very clear what decisions I make, what decisions you make. Another thing, which is one of my favorite things, is that leaders need to set the frame. And let me explain what that means. So leaders set the frame. They say, this is what I want you to do, meaning, so for example, last year we were playing with AI. So I said to my team, I want you to come up with a solution for AI in terms of how to enhance people development. And what I said to them is what I don't want is I don't want it to be anything that is similar that demoralizes people, like using AI to fire people, right? Using AI as a negative. I don't want any of that. So that helped them understand what they were going to do. So the more we can create the frame and we let the team members fill it in, then we can start to erode some of these hierarchical elements. One of the things as leaders we have to be super careful of during times of change, decision making tends to go up in organizations. So we have to be very cognizant that we're pushing that decision making down, even when it's difficult.
In chapter 6, Unlocking Personal Power, you outlined the shift from taking to giving and selecting to creating. What advice would you give leaders who struggle to shift their mindset in those areas?
Yeah, so one is they have to get beyond their own mindset, meaning they have to move beyond that they don't have all the answers, right? So it's very easy for a leader who has done the job before and knows it, that they believe that they can do it. And they have to allow themselves to be surprised that other people can do it better or have different experiences or can add to it. And that is one of the most important things leaders need to shift out of. Now, the beauty is that Generation X, those of us walking around, we were the generation that actually moved from the hierarchical to the shared power through learning the management practices of coaching, giving feedback. So the land is much more fertile for that place right now with the leaders that are really in the senior positions. So that's actually quite positive.
You mentioned the importance of self compassion. How
Yeah.
can leaders balance self compassion with the drive for high performance? And what do you mean by self compassion?
Yeah, so self-compassion, this is interesting. So we created an assessment tool that is linked to the book. So it actually measures all the concepts in the book. And funny enough, the lowest scale we have that when people had taken it, we've had hundreds of people take it, self-compassion is the one that's the lowest score. So what we mean by that is self-compassion means I learn and I grow, but I don't beat myself up, right? So and when I'm having compassion for the other people in my group, I have compassion, meaning I understand their context. Doesn't mean I let them off the hook, but it means I can show up and I can understand their feelings and their experiences in the moment. Super important.
How do they develop that skill?
Of self-compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Like what things do
self-compassion.
you recommend that they do?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of an inner journey of self-compassion. So one thing that I think works really, really well is to ask yourself the question, if I didn't do well or I missed the mark, right? Did I do the best that I knew how given the situation? And if the answer is yes to that, and 99% of the time the answer is yes to that, right? Then the question is, what can I learn from it? What can I do differently? So that we do it with compassion rather than beating ourselves up. A lot of the times we relive things over and over and over again, and that's not useful. So I would also recommend it's good to talk to somebody who is empathetic, who can then help you see the situation maybe in a different way so that you can learn more from it. The key is the unlocking is the growth mindset and the learning.
In chapter 7, The Gateways to a Deeper Part of Yourself, you discuss the 5 stages of human development.
Mhm.
Whoops.
You lost your place.
Yeah. Um,
And the
you
socialized mind.
discussed the 5 stages of human development. How many people are stuck in the socialized mind?
Yeah.
How can leaders help their
Yeah.
teams move towards self-authoring and self-transforming minds?
Yeah, it's a bit, this is an interesting thing because if you look back in the 90s, DDI came out with a book Zapped, which was fascinating, fabulous, right? But it fell short. And the reason being is at that point, leaders weren't willing to give power. But now they're willing to give power. But now you have 58% of the population stuck in socialized mind, meaning they believe that they need to follow the blueprint and they don't believe that they can co-create their own existence and their own life. So if we want to help people as leaders, then we need to help them see that they can create their own pathways. So we need to give them space to co-create, right? We need to help them be able to vision. So anytime we invest in visioning, you want to hear something super interesting. So when we did this research study on the assessment tool that we were using, and we were doing it with teams, right? So we had one team where one leader was on the team as a participant, and then she was on the team as a leader. Interestingly enough, when she saw herself as a participant of the team, she rated her personal agency lower than when she was in her own team. So leaders tend to have, in general, more personal agency because they believe they can shape things. So part of that helping people is giving them the belief and asking those igniting questions so they do believe they can shape their own destiny. And also asking them, what do they want? We were working when I was at Novartis, we were working on a senior leadership program with females, and the whole purpose of the program was to get these senior leaders to be top of the house. And the next level leader were coaching them, and all of those leaders realized that the people had a limited view of what was possible. So by them opening up that view and sharing where they could go, it changed everything. And now people who were in that cohort, they're heading up business units, they're heading up their own business. Almost, I would say 75% of them have moved to senior leaders. And that was one of the key ingredients that we incorporated into the program.
Just curious, what trips people up from getting to the top? Like what are some of the mistakes that they make that they should really focus on?
So there are a couple of things. You mean the top of the organization?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody I think strives to be into the C-suite. But I think some folks like they may be great in sales, they may be great in marketing, they
Yeah.
may be great in product development, but they're really lacking in certain
Right.
skills.
So I would say there are probably a couple things that for the top of the house is one is you need to have vision. You really need to look at not just what the business is focusing on now, but you need to anticipate where the business is going. And if you can't do that, that's very hard to get to the top. The other thing I noticed, I mentioned before emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence is very good up until N minus three, right? But then when you're going to that next level, where you're sitting on the executive team, if you can't process large amounts of information quickly, you're not going to get there. Because, for example, when I was at Novartis, the executives had to read 1,000 pages of pre-work before a meeting, in addition to doing their regular job. This is
Wow.
standard. Yes, so executives have to process large pieces of information at the same time. And if they can't do that, they can't get there. The last thing I would say that's super important is they really need to shape culture. If you don't shape culture, culture will shape itself. So really good leaders who are really like inspirational, they really think about what do I want to create in this culture? What does it feel like to work here? And can we make it meaningful and purposeful? And I would say those are the three most important things. The last thing I would say that where leaders, if you don't have it, it's very difficult if you're not composed. So
It,
leaders who are not composed because they have what we call the neurotic personality, like from the Big Five, they have a difficulty because they look at things through what could go wrong rather than what could go right. And that limits their capability of getting to the top.
Is that happen more in certain industries, especially where people are risk adverse, maybe like in the financial services or insurance industry?
I actually don't see it so much in the financial. I think anytime you have a regulated field, that does play a part. But I always like to distinguish with my leaders. There is a regulation, which means we have to follow the rules, but then there's also leadership risk. So leadership risk is different. So we have to differentiate them because they're not the same, right? Yes, I need to protect the business and I need to follow the rules, but it doesn't mean that you can't be creative and think about it from a leadership perspective. Like think about the example I gave before, right? David Epstein created a whole new industry, right?
Yeah.
Within the parameters, within the regulations of pharma.
Many, even smaller organizations that let's say 50 to 100 are multinational
Yes.
today. And being in Asia, um, risk is encouraged, but failure is really frowned upon. So, like, how do you do risk without failure?
You bring up such a good point because this is psychological safety, right? So when
Yeah.
we're trying to create psychological safety, we need to distinguish, right? We need to distinguish where is there no deviation possible? So if I need to follow a process because lives are at stake, or if you deviate, it's going to cost the company a lot of money. You have to let people up front know that. And then when it comes to risk taking, right, you need to share with people where they can play, where they're not going to get it right. I mean, think anyone who has a child, your child did not get up and start running, right? They had to go through those small steps. So if we can help people know where they're, we can support them. And I think that's another thing leaders need to think of. I always like to think of the Tom Cruise example in Top Gun, right? Where he leaves Val Kilmer and Val Kilmer's pissed off because he left his wingman, right? And I want you to think as leaders, you never leave your wingman. right? If you are putting someone in a stretch assignment, you need to make sure you support them through that stretch assignment so that you're reducing risk. You don't just, like when I was at Pfizer, they threw people in the deep end and then they failed. We can't do that. That doesn't work.
Is it, throwing them in the deep end I think when I was at Wharton, we threw students into deep end, but they weren't crushed by it. Like it's one thing to throw them into the deep end and say, okay, you made mistakes. What did you learn? It's another thing to throw them in the deep end and then criticize them for the mistakes, right?
Yeah, of
And then
course.
hold that against them. So it's
Of course.
probably more so not throwing them into the deep end, but the result of whatever happened in the deep end and not allowing them to learn from that. And now everybody's afraid to be thrown into the deep end.
Of course. But you have to remember, you throw someone in the deep end when they have the learning agility, right? We're throwing people in the deep end because when you're talking about Wharton, right? You're talking about
Yep.
the top 5, 10%, right?
Yeah.
That's not what exists in companies, you know? That's a very small percentage. So you have to be very well aware of people's learning agility, how fast, how much stretch they can take. Because if you put people in a greater stretch than they're capable of, it actually creates an amygdala hijack in the brain. Their brain narrows and they can't even use the capabilities that they have. So we have to be super careful that we're matching the risk and what the stretch to what that person can do. Super
Uh,
important.
how do you recommend leaders address the masks that they wear and encourage others to do the same in a professional
Yeah.
setting?
Yeah. So here's a very interesting thing. Most of us don't know what our masks are. We don't know, right? So part of that exploration that I've done with teams and leaders is first we need to, and we do this through our assessment tools, we need to understand what our masks are, what are the underlying fears, and then we create through dialogue with each other how we can start to uncover these masks. How can we deal with the fears? What are our triggers when the masks show up? Because remember, what a mask is what do I want to show to the world and what do I want to hide? So until you create a level of self-awareness, people can't deal with their masks, so they can't be more authentic. And the masks always show up when they're under stress. And then just imagine in the workplace, my mask is hitting your mask. That is the formula for disaster in the workplace.
How do you recommend leaders? You mentioned that loneliness is in the workplace is at an all-time high. I think that's in society as a whole.
It is.
What strategies can leaders use to foster authentic human connection in hybrid or remote work environments? And actually, I applaud Jamie Dimon and others
Yeah.
forcing people to come back to the workplace because I really don't understand how you can judge people and either help them be better or move them
Yeah.
up the ladder without seeing them on a daily basis.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things. I think one is leaders have to be attuned much more if they're working in a virtual environment. And what do I mean by that? It means I have to pay attention to tone. I have to pay attention to language. I have to watch how someone shows up. What is their stress level? I need to be able to do that. And I want to get back to this kind of in-person thing, right? One of the things that companies have been doing, and we've actually implemented it on our team because we have a completely virtual team. Only a couple of us work in the same space. One of the things we do is we do a coffee chat. So every 2 weeks, we have a session where there's no agenda and we just come in and we start to say, what's happening in your life? What are you doing? What are you looking forward to? What's bothering you? Right? We have these abilities for people to connect. And I think one of the key elements of why COVID was so detrimental is we actually get energy from human connection. So part of it is also when we have these virtual sessions, we tend to jump right into business. We don't leave time for human connection. So if I'm in a meeting room, I have time for that small chit chat. It feels a little bit awkward in a meeting space. So we need to be able to create and cultivate that to be able to, for people to feel that heart connection with each other.
Do you think now that there may be certain industries, like maybe you're in
Yeah.
business, where they don't have to be in day to day, or that your people are so senior that they don't necessarily have to interact in a physical way, that they don't have to be in the same space? Because I kind of think law firms and accounting firms, they're all like individual practitioners with very
Yeah.
little no actually interaction with each other.
Yeah, I think it depends on what the interaction is. So, for example, one of my clients, they said, okay, everybody has to come back to the office 3 days a week, right? So they've
Uh,
done that. But then the employees are complaining because they're asked to come back to the office, but they don't cultivate a space where people are actually socializing, right? So that's the detrimental piece. So we have to make sure we're balancing. Are we, if we're going to ask people to come back to work, and the US has done this more than Europe. Europe has stayed more 2 to 3 days a week coming in. So we have to cultivate that space where if people are coming in, how do we use that time to co-create? How do we use that time to connect versus I'm doing my same meetings online that I would do at home because I'm working globally anyway. So that is, I think, we have to be very deliberate about how we're having people interact. Very
you,
deliberate.
what could American companies learn from European companies in this area that would be valuable to them? And is there anything that European companies can learn from American companies that would
Oh.
also be of value to them?
Such a great question. I think European American companies can learn from European companies that there are many, many different ways of doing things. American companies who tend to work in Europe want to do it the American way. And sometimes that backfires. They don't see the nuances. But if you live in Europe and you're used to being around so many different countries, you have a much more appreciative approach that there's different ways of doing things. So I think that's one. I think where the European companies can work from the American companies is that this drive, this passion, we don't have a safety net in the U.S. So people really jump in with their wholeheartedness. And if you look at the engagement numbers that Gallup just put out, engagement numbers are always higher in the US than in Europe. Europe is actually one of the lower ones. So European leaders don't always engage people on that passionate level. The Europeans tend to have a much more focus on living versus on living their life versus putting their career first. So
Yeah,
I think those are two things that they can really learn from each other.
yeah, and I think a lot of Americans like, especially under the age of 35, like that much better.
The European style.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that often from my students
Yeah.
that they would prefer it, and younger American uh, people who enter the workforce. In chapter 9, The Power of Selfless Collaboration, you
Mm.
differentiate between cooperation and collaboration. How can leaders identify when collaboration is truly needed versus cooperation will suffice?
So this is actually one of the biggest mistakes that leaders are making, and they're overburdening their people. Because when we're talking about this notion of cooperation, we're meaning that I need to get somebody else involved for my work product to be better, or it touches another part of the organization. So therefore, I need to involve another department. That is cooperation, right? But that doesn't mean I need to be in 50 different meetings, right? So we say we want collaboration, but that's not collaboration, that's cooperation. Where collaboration is really when we have something new, when we're trying to solve a complex problem that has not been solved before. Now, this is where collaboration is beautiful because that means each one of us comes with a piece of the puzzle. And when we bring that nuance, then we can create something that neither one of us could have dreamed on our own. And that's when it works really well.
What strategies can leaders use to address the roadblocks to collaboration, such as team overload and scarcity of mindsets?
Yeah, so the scarcity of mindset is an interesting one because scarcity means I need more resource to get things done. And one of the things I found in my career is you give people less resources and they're more innovative. So that's one thing we need to help. We need to help. We need to challenge people to come up with different ideas by giving them less resources, not more. That's one, because they actually will become more creative. The second thing is we need to get rid of all these meetings. There's just way too many meetings. If you look at people's schedules, they're in meetings from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. They barely have time to do their emails. They barely have time to do their work. And the average leader needs at least 2 hours to 2.5 hours of their time to get their work done. So we need to unburden them. We have way too many. Everybody, this is this over collaboration when it's really cooperation. You don't need
Uh,
everybody in it. You have to trust people more. This is the one thing that I've seen with companies is that everyone's like, oh, I need to be there. I need to be there because they're not trusting their colleagues to represent them and they need more trust.
And I also think they feel like if they're not being seen, that they're being forgotten.
Yeah, that's part of it, but that's also the I have to be FaceTime, right? But then
Yeah,
but the thing is they show up to the meetings, but then they're multitasking. So they're not
yeah.
even present and they're not even contributing. So if I'm in a meeting and I'm not contributing, why am I there? I'm not adding any
It's
value.
It's funny you should say that because I work on that with my students because some of them are afraid to raise their hand. And so I said, I'm going to call you not to embarrass you, but if you don't get better at communicating in groups, you won't have a job because people are not hiring
Absolutely.
you for your skill set. They're hiring you for your intelligence, your creativity,
Oh,
your ability to solve problems. And if you don't show that, then they need somebody else to be in that room, not you. You're just taking up space.
yeah. And the one thing that I have to say where the organizations waste a lot of time, right, is that they're not always knowing what problem they're solving. So everybody has good intention and they're coming into the meetings wanting to do something and add value, right? But the reality is that people are not clear about what problem we're trying to solve. So this is something the leaders have to get really good at. I've worked with very senior teams and I'm surprised how weak this skill is. High performing companies, this is very strong skill that they know how to do this.
Question from the audience. Your framework for being all in suggests that leaders can harness challenge, disruption to develop deeper self-awareness and personal transformation and purpose-driven leadership,
Mhm.
often emerging from adversity. Post-traumatic growth, PTG, is the positive psychological change experienced as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances or trauma. Do you think PTG can be introduced, designed as a training and improvement tactic?
Well, that's such a great question. My experience has been, and a lot of this comes from the derailer work that we do, is that when you create space for someone to explore themselves, they actually go through an immense healing in the moment. So the more we can, true transformation happens at the heart level, not at the head level. So the more we can create space for that and be able to have that emotional intelligence with people, we can create that space. But the one thing, if we're going to do it, we need to have practitioners who really know psychology and know how to guide people through these deeper journeys. We had at Novartis, we took people on very deep journeys of themselves, but you need facilitators who are super skilled to do that.
Um, a question from the audience that wants to know, is there a plan to record this book for Audible because they would like to be listening to this book?
We have not done that yet, but it could be on the table.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would enjoy
Yeah.
that. I know I listen to books all the time,
Yeah.
along with reading all every day. Um, in chapter 10, Embracing Our Differences, you highlight that diversity drives better business outcomes. And I've seen studies by Harvard that show
Yeah.
as high as 37%.
Yes.
What role should leaders play in creating a culture of belonging beyond hiring for diversity?
Yeah, so for me, I think we've gone in the wrong direction on this because we think about diversity in terms of hiring. But what I really want to see is diversity, is I want diversity to come into um, different ways of thinking, right? So when I was at Novartis, we had diversity and we had inclusion, right? They were two separate things. And one time I went to a very senior meeting and I looked around and I saw the most diverse group of people. I felt like I was at the UN, right? But the inclusion wasn't there because we wanted people to follow the same frameworks and think the same ways. So if we're really trying to leverage that, right, we need to be able to create the belonging, which is around the connection, right? Making sure people are emotionally connected, right? They need to have the inclusion, which means I want to bring in your thoughts. I can't tell you how many teams I work with, multiple teams throughout the year. And the one thing is, very few people in teams are aware of who's speaking and who's not speaking and who's adding value. So one of the biggest things we can do to create that belonging is to make sure our heightened awareness of who's being included and who's not. And then the last element of this element of belonging is about feeling valued. People want to know their contribution matters, right? So how are we acknowledging it? How are we rewarding people? What instruments are we using? Because when you think about rewarding people and catching people doing things well, you're filling their emotional tank. So then, if their emotional tank is filled and they feel a sense of belonging and valued, then when you need to give them difficult feedback, they can take it. But if you notice people are getting reactive when you're giving negative feedback, you haven't filled their emotional tank yet. So, very
Yeah,
important to do that.
I think that's more important to them than money, and it always has been. Like your
I
best
completely agree.
performers.
Yeah. Can I tell you, I was working with a CEO at the time, and he's like, why do I need to do this? He's like, I have the best executives. And then I gave him the reason, and he was just dumbfounded. He couldn't believe it. Like he never thought about it, that, oh my God, they're human beings.
And don't you wonder how he rose all the way up the ladder to that position?
Not really, because a lot of leaders get to the top because they deliver results.
That's what I was going to say is
They
if they
deliver
deliver
results.
numbers, because the boards are typically made up of people who are focused just on numbers. They're
They deliver the
finance
numbers.
types.
Yep,
Yeah.
they deliver the numbers, so therefore they get promoted. And one of the biggest mistakes companies make is they actually take the best individual contributors and they move them into leadership spots, and they're not the best people leaders. So you already start your talent pipeline a little bit skewed because you don't have the right people. I'd rather have someone who has less technical skills, but more people skills in my people jobs.
I agree with you
Biggest
100%. I think
mistake.
that's a constant
Biggest
mistake.
mistake. And one of the things is we have this amazing assessment. I call it the Harry Potter assessment, right? We call it core potential. We actually help people understand should you go on a leadership track or should you go on an expert track? And it's absolutely brilliant. And if more companies used it, they wouldn't make these mistakes.
I can't even begin to tell you how much I really agree with that line of thinking in that statement. I just see it over and
Yeah,
over again, and they keep making the same mistake.
the same
That's why you have
mistake.
these. That's why you have these CEOs. Every time you read the Wall Street Journal, this
Yep.
one lasted a month. This one lasted 3 months, and they're so shocked that these people that they selected didn't make it. But I'm not shocked at all,
Yeah.
especially when you read why they ended up firing them.
Yes.
Um, how can leaders, and this probably be our last question, how
Mm.
can leaders address unconscious bias in themselves and their teams while fostering a psychologically safe workplace? I think this
Yeah.
is also a huge mistake that's made.
Yeah, it's a big mistake because first of all, we have to become aware of what our biases are. Sometimes we don't even know, right? And that makes, until we understand that, we can't see the world through a different lens, right? I know for myself, accountability is a hot button for me. So if someone doesn't have accountability, I may devalue them versus someone who maybe focuses on making connection and relationship, right? So leaders really need to understand what is their own unconscious bias? How does it play in the way they make decisions, how they relate to people? So this is that key element around self-awareness, right? Leaders, I mean, Korn Ferry has done a survey, a research study showing that companies have more self-awareness. They're 30% more profitable.
I believe that as well. And
So
you
if
see
you
it. It's
want,
like,
if I have leaders out there and you want to make your business better, the number one thing to do is to grow your leaders' self-awareness.
it
Very
seems like
important.
common sense, right? Seems
It's
like
common
common
sense,
sense.
but only common to people who have it. We think putting people through leadership, like I can't tell you how many leadership development programs people do without an assessment. Why would you do that? Why would you not put in a leadership assessment? It's like leadership development 101, but there's lots of companies that do that.
I
So these
think
are
it's
some basic
mostly
things.
people run by numbers types that
Ah,
here's something that does give them numbers that they should follow, but they think it's
exactly.
soft.
Yeah, and assessment is actually not soft. I can actually look at a group of people and say, like we did for one organization, we did assessment and we broke down by the different operation groups, the different functions, and we were able to see where the groups were not doing well. And then when we showed them the data, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's so true. Our operations group is really struggling." And we're like, "And here's the reason why, and these are the areas you need to strengthen." So
Yeah,
it's
I agree with you totally.
Yeah,
and they're so
so this
useful.
is,
I used to use uh, an assessment called Profiles back in the 90s. And that thing was so accurate
yeah,
every time. And the
yeah,
guy who was giving it said to me, "Oh, he had me do the
yeah,
test so he could show me what look.
yeah,
Oh, this thing is BS. It doesn't work." I said, "What's wrong?" Because it says that you don't like sales. I said, "I really don't like sales.
yeah,
I'm just forced to do it
yeah,
as a serial entrepreneur. But if it's up to me, I don't
right,
like to sell at all."
right. You
And
would
so I
outsource
said,
it to somebody. Yeah.
"Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah,
you're
and
forced."
what was beautiful is we've created these integrated assessments. It's so beautiful because we're looking across traits, competencies, derailers, someone's managing their energy, right, and their drivers. And when I look across everything, I have so much awareness about this person. People are like, "How do you know me?" Like, and people always tell us, like, I've taken so many assessment tools, and when I see this assessment and I get my feedback, I learn more about myself than I've ever learned from something else. And that is such a testament to our work in terms of coming from a research place and also helping people unlock what their assessment data means. So
Yeah,
important.
I think these assessments have really grown a lot since Myers-Briggs,
Oh yeah.
um, enormously. I want to thank you so much because I could
Thank
have
you.
spent the day talking to you
I
about
know.
this
I know.
subject. So I really enjoyed it, and I think everybody else did as well. So I wish you the best with your book, and
Thank you.
hopefully you'll write another one,
Thank
and we'll
you.
have you back.
Absolutely. And thank you, Mark, so much. I really appreciate the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Have a good rest of the day and a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.